Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 27th Degree with Chris and Nancy from 27 Degrees Consulting. So today is a little bit different, very different, because there's only two of us here.
There is only two of us.
Which
We
is,
don't have a buffer. It's scary.
this is really unusual to have just two people instead of a guest. So we realize that all this time we've been doing our podcast, we talk about 27 Degrees Consulting as this entity out there, but I don't think anyone really knows what 27 Degrees is. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about what we do and just about our business in general, because I think there's a lot that we do that could be useful to others out there. But before we get into that, let's talk about our sponsor. I always like to recognize Bay Coast Bank, which is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoastbank.com or call 508-678-7641, and we're always appreciative to Bay Coast Bank for supporting these efforts. So
I think we should probably start by talking just a little bit about ourselves and how we formed the company.
Sure.
So you go first.
You can do that, sure. So, I think everyone's figured this out. I'm a physician. I'm an internist, and I practice primary care here in Fall River. But one of the things I was always interested in was patient experience. And I kind of got into this in a weird way. Consumer Reports puts out these articles or these reviews on practices, and not that we were trying to do anything to get into Consumer Reports, but a few years back we ended up being rated very highly. As far as practices in Massachusetts, I think we were the third highest rated practice. So that got me thinking a lot about, well, what we were doing. We had to be doing something right? Because these were random surveys that were sent out to patients. And I started to just study a little bit about patient experience or look into it. And, what are the things that practices tend to do that are important to patients? And I realized a lot of the things that we were just doing kind of intuitively were on the list of what we should be doing, which was a nice thing. But then I got more and more interested in patient experience, and then at some point, I became the physician lead for the Steward Network for Patient Experience. They recognized what we had done in the office, and they wanted to try to get this out to other practices. So I started working to do that, and then I met Nancy through that. I actually knew Nancy beforehand, but I met her at least in the professional type of venue. And we would go out to practices, and we would basically evaluate practices that were getting bad scores in their patient experience. And we would try to make some recommendations as to what could be done to help these practices out. And as time went on, Steward got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they went from, a 12-hospital system, which I think when we were working with them, to a, 40 hospital system. They just bought hospitals everywhere throughout the country. And then they really needed someone full-time, quite honestly, and I was practicing full-time, so I stepped down from that position. But at that point, Nancy and I, we had really enjoyed what we did, and the rest you can talk about a little bit.
I think we both figured out that we could really bring something unique to the table. I mean, Chris obviously was a physician. He had a great perspective from that angle, very passionate about patient experience, and really wanted to offer the best service to his patients and translate that to other offices. I had a process improvement background. I'm a Six Sigma black belt, so I can look at a current workflow or a current practice or a process and really know how to optimize that and step in there. And along with that, there's other components that come into play when you're looking at the full package. So how do you offer a great service? How do you keep your patients or your customers happy? But more importantly, or as importantly as a component with all that, especially in the post-COVID world, we really look at staff engagement. And that's really boiled up to the head as a very important issue nowadays.
Right, absolutely.
So I think we also concentrate a little bit on that, and we've had some fun, and we've had some great wins, with our business. So I thought, we could probably actually do a whole series on certain aspects of what we do, leadership strategies or staff engagement or process improvement. But today will just be a little taste, a little overview of what we do, and we'll talk a little bit about a few of the key points with that. So I think when we talk, we can start maybe talking about staff engagement and our relationships with staff. And I think, as I read things or I look at the literature or I listen to different podcasts, everyone puts out there, these are the 7 things you should do as a leader. These are the 10 things you should do. These are the 4 things you should never do. But from a personal perspective, I also think it's important to talk about our learning moments. We have learned many things over the course of our career, and we like to take that into the offices or the environments that we assess. But let's talk a little bit about what we've learned in our learning moments.
Sure.
So maybe as you formed your office and started working with relationships and staff, talk about some of your learning moments. So maybe just like the learning moment that comes to mind.
Sure. Well, hopefully we're not boring anyone. I promise. Stick with us. This will be interesting. I think you'll
I have a lot of secrets about
you'll
Chris,
learn a
so
lot.
stick with
You're
us.
going to learn a lot. But so I was lucky that I had some great mentors when I first started in medicine. So after I graduated from UMass, I did a chief residency year, which is a really it's a pretty prestigious thing to do. It's a teaching year. You teach the residents that are under you. There's some administrative work, of course, too. But then I came back to Fall River, which is my hometown, and I was fortunate to work with 2 great docs, Dr. Warren or Chip Wood and Mark Thoreau. And I joined their practice. I was with them for a long time until I broke out on my own. But I think they really taught me a lot of what I have brought forward as far as how I practice. Chip and Mark were great leaders, and they were very interested in providing a great practice experience for patients, and it's something that I just carried forward. And there were a lot of things that they taught me that were just really inherent to what they did, that was really helpful as I went on into practice myself. And I didn't realize that I was doing a lot of the right things because I didn't know necessarily. I mean, I hadn't really researched the literature, right? So I didn't know that, okay, here are the 7 things you should do or the 4 things you shouldn't do. But after that Consumer Report article came out, I started to look into it a little bit more and be more academic about it. And I realized, we were doing a lot of what we should do. And a lot of what we were doing was because I had been taught a lot of this from my mentors. And I don't think they necessarily had studied patient experience in a formal way, but they were well-respected and are well-respected physicians who, were doing the right things. And I learned a lot from them. So I don't know if I answered your question, Nancy, actually, about teaching points.
I think it was close enough. And we've talked a little bit about reviews. Doctors do get reviews. So anyone that's looking to find a new doctor, please be aware that there are sites. Chris has mentioned Consumer Reports. U.S. News does a very comprehensive rating on doctors. So there's a lot of research you can do before you choose a primary care physician or a specialist. You can rely on recommendations from your friends. And you can also supplement that with looking at these sites. And if you're a practitioner out there, I think it would be very interesting to pull your own report and see what patients are saying about you and how you're graded against your peers and your colleagues.
Yeah. And if you're a patient out there and you're looking at this stuff, you got to look at the bulk of it all, because there's always going to be the bad review here and there. It happens.
It's like looking at the Amazon reviews, probably.
Right. Exactly. Unfortunately,
there'll be that one person.
There are patients that leave unhappy that we really can't do anything about. And sometimes it's not really the interaction they've had with the physician. It could be a copay issue. There could be financial issues. There's often medication issues where, they want a particular drug that you think is inappropriate. A lot of times this comes down to the opioids and that. And sometimes, bad reviews are left for those reasons. And we can't do much about that. We have to ultimately practice medicine the way that we feel medicine should be practiced. But you want to look at the bulk. I mean, if every review is bad, clearly that's an issue. But you're going to have a couple bad things here and there. You're going to have patients who are upset for the reasons that I mentioned. But you want to look at, what is what are most people saying? I think that's the important thing.
Right.
I think that's what's key. And there's going to be some outliers here and there.
So you had mentioned one word that struck me, a mentor. And I think, when we look to see what kind of leaders we want to be, and a lot of, we talk about leadership skills, but a lot of these skills will translate into your personal life as well. You want to be a great listener. You want to be fair. You want to be honest. You want to be transparent. Well, those are great life traits and values too.
Right.
When you talk about great mentors, I think of one of the last bosses that I worked for. It was actually someone we know, Michelle.
Yeah, sure.
She's gotten married since it's Michelle Roderick Spelong right now. It was Michelle Azevedo, and I worked for her. And I think she did a lot of things that I learned the importance of. It reinforced that communication is so important. I mean, she had a great style where she would sit down her leadership team and really talk to them about, this is what we're going to focus on this week. This is where we want to be at this point. This is how we're going to get here. And, having all the disciplines there present at the table so everyone's on the same page and everyone knows what piece they play in the puzzle was very important. And that was a weekly meeting. Besides that, you have one-to-one meetings. And that really brought home the strength of communication as a good leader. And also, we talked about staff retention, which is so important these days, and to make someone feel valued and appreciated. And those were moments that within the meeting, she would take the time and do that. So I would stress the importance of that, as looking at someone who mentored me. It was very important to have that structured communication set up in a way, again, that everyone's on the same page. You're getting to feel valued and appreciated. Your voice is getting heard. And that was important to me.
Well, I think the communication is probably the number one thing. It's the most important thing with your interactions with your staff and your colleagues, but also with your patients or in any business, because, we don't only deal with patient experience at this point, we also deal with customer service too. We've kind of expanded into that arena. So a lot of the stuff that we dealt with patient experience was very translatable to other businesses. Quite honestly, a lot of it really is. So, but communication is a big one, and you have to be able to communicate with your colleagues, with your patients, with your customers, with your staff. And if you can't do that, then you're going to lose the battle, essentially.
I think so too, and I think not assuming things either. I think you, as a leader or as a person that people report to, the outcome of a situation, but you may not know all the steps on how it happened. So I think that's really important too. Like, don't assume that you do. Get the story firsthand from the person that was involved in it. I think is super important. And that goes to your listening skills as well, again.
I agree. Like, here's a mistake that often leaders make, anyone in a management position. They have a worker that is under them, and a few weeks go by, they've hired this person, and they're just not functioning up to par. And, so now they're labeled as they're kind of a bad worker, and then they're looking for, ways to maybe replace them. And what often is not realized is they've never really told the worker what the expectations are. And we see that a lot, right? Someone will come into an office for a particular job, and they have no idea what their expectations are. And then they're not meeting the expectations because they don't know what those expectations are. So communication, once again, so crucial when it comes to staff members on many levels.
And I think hiring for fit, right?
Yeah.
Like, you really need to make sure you're hiring a really good fit with your staff. And to that point, grab a couple of staff people and include them in on the interview.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
You can get their feedback and see how, what they're picking up with too on the interviewee.
And I agree, Nancy. I mean, you can't assume that people just kind of know what you're thinking. I mean, you have to talk to them. I mean, it's the same thing with patients. I mean, maybe the audience will not find this surprising, but physicians aren't always great communicators with patients. And I was very fortunate that when I went to UMass, which was really a fabulous primary care school, it was at the time, ranked #1 school for primary care education in the country. We did a lot of things that were novel at the time that are actually accepted now. So one of the things we did, we were the first school to do this in the country, is we had actor patients. Now it's pretty much standard. Pretty much every medical school in the country uses actor patients, but that wasn't the way it was years ago. So we would have patients that would come in, and there'd be a scenario, Mr. Jones has abdominal pain or whatever it may be. And you'd go in and you'd have to do the history as a third or fourth year medical student to try to learn on how to ask questions to the patient, and then you do the exam on them, and it was, they weren't real patients, but in every sense they seemed like real patients. And then they would stop and give you feedback at the end. Well, I think the way you said this was could have been done better if it was an open-ended question versus a closed question, or this part of the exam you didn't do as well as I would like. That was really valuable. Now that's the standard in medical schools. It wasn't the standard back then. We were kind of on the cutting edge. So I learned a lot doing that, just about communication, really, because schools back then didn't have communication courses, but this was pretty much a communication course, which was very good.
Do they do anything differently now? Do they?
They're doing that now. The different thing with schools now is they use a lot of this is really interesting. They use a lot of computer and robotic type of situation. So they have if you're doing a surgical rotation before you start operating on a person, of course, they have a robot that you can do certain things on, and
Is it like the operation game?
yeah, it's like virtual surgery. There's all kinds of wild stuff that they're doing. I mean, I went back to UMass a few years ago, and I was amazed at the technology and how it had changed.
Of course. Getting back to, again, something that you had said, if people aren't a good fit because maybe they don't know what the expectations are, maybe they just promised you the world in the interview, and then they come in and you're like, gosh, I wish I taped your interview so I could replay it because you're not doing anything that you said you would be doing.
Right.
So you just have that, that they're most likely not going to work out. And then, you can decide to handle that in two different ways too. We talk about a lot when we go into different situations that we're assessing as a company, how are you coaching? Are you coaching someone for success, or are you doing a different approach that may not lead to the outcomes that you want? And if you're coaching to success, people do have a skill set, and even though it may not be the skill set that you're looking for, there's still a way to transition that successfully. I'll tell you a story. I had hired a new nurse, and she was a smart girl, and she just couldn't handle the busyness of the unit. At that time, I managed a respiratory med-surg floor. And again, nice nurse, smart nurse, but there was no way she was going to be able to handle the workload that came with a 6-patient. We had a 6-patient assignment on days.
So there's some organizational issues, perhaps.
Yeah. And you could tell she'd be a great nurse maybe in a visiting nurse situation where it's a little bit more one-on-one, and the pace isn't such that it is on a med-surg floor. So we worked with her. We had a weekly action plan, but the goal was hopefully to make her realize what her strengths were, but realize that they weren't best suited to the situation she was in now. And we did transition her to another environment where she ended up doing very well. Yeah. And I think it's important as a leader to know or to realize that you can coach for success and look at what an employee does offer and put them in a more successful situation.
Yeah, sometimes they're just not in the right environment. I mean, sometimes they haven't been told what the expectation is, and you can teach that, but sometimes you do that and still they don't have the skill set to be able to succeed in that environment, but they may succeed in another environment.
Oh, absolutely.
So you have to look at that. A lot of times I think employees get labeled, lazy, whatever it is, and a lot of times that's not the case. It's just that they don't know what's expected of them. They don't have the training and the skill set to succeed, and that's more the issue. So
yeah, and sometimes it can be the case.
And sometimes they are lazy.
At that point,
and we've had that too.
There's
but
accountability on the leader's part to really address that.
Sometimes there are issues that you just, you're not going to fix, and there's sometimes our personality issues in that. But there's a lot you have to go through before you get to that point.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk just a little bit about what inspires you. You had touched a little bit on your mentors, but what are some of the traits that they possess that were really like, this is definitely what I have to?
Yeah. They're both, incredibly hardworking. They had a great work ethic, or have a great work ethic. Dr. Wood since retired. Dr. Thoreau is still working. They have a great work ethic. They were very honest. They were, I think, they're both incredibly intelligent, but very caring towards the staff and the patients themselves. And those were skills and attributes that I really liked and tried to take with me. What happened was at one point, I really wanted to be, a leader. I wanted to be my own leader. And, nothing against what they were doing. They had a great practice and ran the practice well, but I wanted to do it on my own. So I did. I stepped out and went on my own. And, I brought a lot of what they taught me along, and it's helped me to be successful.
So for our listeners, one of the services that we also offer is coaching, leadership coaching, and one-to-one physician coaching.
Yeah.
That you've done. I know that you've been active with.
Well, why don't you talk about all the things that we offer? That's probably good for the listeners to know. I think that's useful.
Yeah, I think, again, we can start with certainly patient experience scores. If you're not where you want to be as a company with your either customer satisfaction scores or patient experience scores, this is something where we can come in and do an assessment and help you out there with certain strategies to increase your scores and just make your patients or your customers happy, because word of mouth is so very important, and people do look at reviews today
Absolutely.
online and use the internet.
Most of my new patients find me because a lot of them, it's still word of mouth. In the older generation, it's word of mouth.
Yeah.
In the younger people, it's all internet search.
Oh, of course. That's what I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I recently looked for a specialist, and I think I asked you about it, but
Yeah.
then I also went online to look at things as well. The next service we offer would be the one-to-one coaching. Another larger piece of what we do is really go into organization and look at where you are with your workflows. And I think if you're listening, you've all been in a situation where you're doing your job and you're like, my God, why aren't we doing it like this? It would be so much easier. This is like, why do I have to repeat myself 3 times? Why do I have to, this is a duplication. Why are we doing this? This could get a turnaround done in 1 day instead of 3 days if we just did X, Y, Z. So those are all the things that when Chris and I get called in, we look at those workflows. We'll observe your staff in a very unobtrusive way so we don't disrupt the daily operations. But we look at and identify certain workflows, and we streamline those workflows, make them easier. And we do that by incorporating a couple of different strategies that have worked really well for us in the past, and Chris can talk about one of those strategies a little bit later, and how we improved one problem that he was facing in his office at the time. But with that, whenever you improve workflows or make something more efficient, it does usually, the byproduct of that is not only happier staff and happier patients or customers, but it's also a bounce up in revenue that we see quite frequently.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that it impacts on any business more than probably anything else you can do. If you can look at the processes that you have and improve them, and it's often a lot that can be done to make things more efficient. You're absolutely right, Nancy. It helps with patient or customer satisfaction. It helps with employee satisfaction, but it also helps with the bottom line too. And I think that's a key part to all this. That increase in efficiency brings in more income, and a lot of businesses, particularly now, where businesses are struggling post-COVID, that's an important thing, to be as efficient as we can and maximize whatever income is coming in, because overhead has just gone up a lot. It's a really stressful time to work in any business.
It's a crazy new world.
It really is.
For sure. And I think that's where we might be a little unique too, because people say, well, if we're trying to streamline things and we're trying to survive in COVID, I can't afford a consultant. I can't afford a consulting service to come in.
I would say you can't afford not to do it if you're inefficient, really.
Right, because there's so many things that a fresh pair of eyes, a trained fresh pair of eyes can pick up on. And I think we offer a lot of different packages that will suit the needs that you're looking for. We can offer a comprehensive package. We have a a la carte menu, if you will, that if you just need help with one problem, we can come in and facilitate that and streamline the process and show you to have the revenue growth that you want, and sometimes it's not an upfront payment. Sometimes it's a percentage of the increase that you earn. So I think we have a lot of different options available.
Yeah, absolutely.
To anyone who might be interested.
I wonder if we should talk about some of the projects we've done a little bit.
I think
mean,
so. I think
that would be
yours
useful.
was great.
Yeah.
So Chris's office, they wanted to improve access when you were calling into the office. And you can talk a little bit about what you
Well,
were
this is
facing.
a big problem with any primary care office. We just have a lot of patients, and there's a lot of needs, and we want patients to get through on the phone or get through in some way. Now we also use the computer quite a lot via the portal. But, we want there to be access, because without access, it's probably the most important thing for patient experience is having good access. That's definitely high on the list. And, we were getting some complaints that, I called, I couldn't get through, this and that. And, and that translates into I can't get an appointment. And it's something that, we obviously don't want. We want patients to get in and be satisfied and get the care they need. So I had some ideas of what we needed to do. But Nancy was, at that time, we were starting to work together. And I said, Nancy, why don't you come into my office and we'll do a study and we'll see what you come up with. And so you can talk about what we did. I thought it was a really
first of
interesting
all,
approach.
I think Chris was just kind of checking me out because he hadn't seen me in action before about how I did things, with a Six Sigma methodology.
Yeah, I think it was pretty early in our relationship
was right
with the
when we
business
first
relationship.
started.
So we almost did it as a pilot to see, well, how's this going to work when we go into other offices, right?
Right. So Chris has a great staff, very engaging, and the culture was pretty good. And that's something you always want to assess too, is what's the work culture? Work culture isn't great. There's a little pre-work to do there, because a lot of times when you try to initiate changes in a work culture that's really subpar, it can be quite challenging. But with Chris's staff, we walked in and we did what's called a brainstorming session. For anyone who's not really aware of what brainstorming is, it's just getting everyone involved in the process in the room, saying, guys, this is our problem.
Yeah, maybe we should back up a little bit. I mean, the first thing to do is you have to identify the problem, right? So we had an idea, but often what you do is you go into a practice and you do a survey of the staff too, which I think is really telling.
Yeah, we do. We use a tool that we developed, a staff engagement survey. And one of the questions that is really important, I feel, on that survey is, if you could change one thing, what would it be and why? And, give us some insight. How would you change it? And that is a quite telling question, and the answers can be quite eye-opening. Someone might not realize that this is the underlying undercurrent in the office.
Yeah. And we try to get into the
department.
culture a lot too, and that's part of this.
And that's when you do a staff engagement survey, that's taking the first step, and it's done anonymously. And that's really taking the first step to say, hey, we want to listen to you. Your voice is important to us. What do you think about what's going on around you and your work environment? So it really opens the door to a lot of conversations.
It's very empowering to the staff when you do
Absolutely.
that. They feel needed, recognized, valued.
And I will put a little asterisk on that. It's very empowering as long as you do something with it and they can see a quick win. And again, those are strategies that we have adopted in our business that we can really optimize on saying, yeah, this isn't a waste of your time. We are doing this, and we will listen to you, and we will start with an initiative that week.
Yeah,
I think that's really important.
You can't always do everything they want, of course, but you do get some great ideas that maybe as a manager or a leader you wouldn't think of on your own. And that's what was interesting when we did our brainstorming session, that they did come up with some thoughts that, I probably would not have gone the route they went, but it did work out. It worked out well, and they felt very empowered. So you can talk a little bit about that, maybe.
Yeah,
I think
the
whole brainstorming thing is very interesting. It's a very focused, very structured way of getting staff engagement. It's not just like, let's all get in a room and think about how we can fix this problem. It's a little more than that. So maybe you can talk about that
a little bit. I will spend a little time on that, because for anyone listening right now, this is something that you can do tomorrow. If you have a known problem in your workplace, you can go in and say, hey guys, I want to take we typically do this over lunch. I want to take this hour over lunch and really kind of brainstorm and put our heads together and see if we can come up with something. But as Chris said, we do it in a very structured way. So it's not just, here's the problem, everyone just shout out your ideas and try to write everything down that you hear on a flip chart.
Because that can be a problem.
That can be a problem. There has to be some ground rules. So what we do when we go in and we brainstorm, and with Chris, it's how do we improve the phone lines? How do we improve access to the phone lines? And we did have our flip chart, but the ground rules here was that everyone had an equal voice. No one could critique anyone else's ideas, because if you start with those conversations, oh, that's not going to work because XYZ, oh, that's not a great idea, or it does three things. It halts the flow of creativity. It's bringing judgment into the room, and then it's empowering one person to knock down someone else's idea.
Right.
So
people will shut down, basically, is what happens at that point.
There's no judging of ideas. So again, you're asking the question. You're going around the table in order. What's your idea? What's your idea? What's your idea? And you're writing all these ideas down, and no one's judging them, no one's critiquing them. So that's a time saver too, because there is a limited amount of time. You don't have all day to do this. We are very structured in a 1 hour time frame. When everyone gives their idea, we go around the table again. When everyone gives their idea again, we read through the ideas and make sure they're very specific. It can't be this broad idea that you're not going to be able to bring a solution to. It has to be something very, very specific. The list of ideas that are up on that flip chart. And then what we do when that list is complete is, and this is probably with about 15 minutes left, we do what's called a multi-vote. So we might have 20 people in the room that have engaged in this activity, and those people are involved in the process. They're not someone sitting outside of this process that don't answer the phones or anything like that. They're involved in the process. So when they come up with these ideas, we have maybe, say we had 30 ideas on the list, and say they were 15 to 20 people in the room. They each get 3 stickers, or they each get 3 choices to make up on the flip chart. And at this point, everyone goes up there and either marks with a marker or puts a little sticker on the chart. What were the 3 most important ideas that came out of this meeting today, do you think? So when that's done, and that gets everyone kind of moving and laughing and picking out and having a little bit of a conversation, but now they're really engaged, because they're not just sitting at a table.
And they're enjoying it, actually.
Yeah, it was a really fun activity. So once that's done, then by the amount of asterisks or the amount of stickers next to certain ideas that you're going to have maybe 5, 6, 7 ideas that, wow, a lot of people thought this was really important. So then with that list, now you have a shortened list. With that list in hand, you're saying, okay, so this one and this one got the most attention from you guys. This is what everyone in the room who's involved in this process feels is the most important. Let's think about, before we leave the room, before you're released, we're holding them hostage at this point. Now there's probably like 5 minutes left. Let's pick this idea, got the most votes. What can we do and implement tomorrow that will help this? What's the one thing we can implement? What's the one little change or a big change that is possible to implement? And if not tomorrow, within the next couple of days, but you want it to be as immediate as possible. And I'll go into the reasons why in a moment. What can that be? And the staff, they are so insightful. Any staff that you do this with, they'll come up with those answers, and they'll be like, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this. And like Chris said, there are a few things on there, and you're a pretty smart guy most of the time. So they came up with a few things that Chris hadn't thought of and would not have thought of, again, because he's not into the weeds with that process. He knows a lot about what's going on in your office. You're hands-on. But this is like really in the weed stuff, and they came up with some great ideas. And one of them was just having a dedicated person answering those lines, having a line
Well,
go to that.
they wanted a medical assistant
Right.
instead of medical secretaries. They wanted a medical assistant up there because a lot of the questions they were getting, and I hadn't really thought about this, were medically oriented questions that the secretaries didn't have the knowledge to answer, and then they would transfer the call back to a medical assistant. It would be, it would go to a voicemail, and then it'd just be going back and forth trying to
Yeah,
catch
it's like
the
phone
person.
tag.
So that was it was an interesting concept that I hadn't really thought about. It did make a big difference. We still have a medical assistant who's up there who gets some of the medically oriented questions. I mean, some of the questions that people call in are, I need to change my appointment or this or that. That doesn't require a medical assistant, but if they call, I need the results of my labs, or I'm having this
Right.
particular medical problem, does this warrant a visit? That's where a medical assistant can be really useful. So that really did improve things quite a bit access-wise.
And just to let you guys know, and Chris said it really improved things, the number of voicemails that were being left on the service on a Monday decreased 82%.
Yeah.
And your patient satisfaction scores went
Yeah.
up 16%.
Yeah.
So that, and we had worked on a few other initiatives as well, but doing that was extremely powerful to the staff, and I'll talk about the reasons. They saw that their voice was listened to, that, yeah, you know what, this is an idea that came from you that we're going to implement. So then guess what happens? It's not a dictate or a mandate. We're doing this starting tomorrow.
You've got their buy-in because
You
they came
already
up with the
have
idea.
their buy-in,
Right,
and they're
that's the beauty of
engaged,
it.
and then they're excited.
Yeah.
And then that staff who maybe last week was like, oh my God, Mondays are like the toughest day of the week. Now they're like, what was our data today? What were our scores?
Yeah.
What were our numbers today? Hey, how's it going? Like, they wanted to know the improvements, and they got excited when they saw those
Sure.
quick wins. And then what happens with the staff too is now, they feel like they can do something about a situation that's maybe not optimal. They become a little army of problem solvers. And that's great to see too,
Yeah.
because now instead of just saying, hey, this isn't working right, the conversation becomes, hey, this isn't working right. Can we try X, Y, Z? So to grow that in your workplace is invaluable. And that's just one strategy that we employ, but it's a very effective strategy.
Yeah, I think staff engagement and empowerment is really crucial for retention, and that's
Of
even more
course.
important now in the post-COVID world
Yeah.
where, it's harder and harder to find people to fill these
Oh, yeah.
jobs. So, the last thing you want to do is have this revolving, door of people coming in and going out in your training and
Yeah.
retraining and retraining.
There's
and
been so much literature with the cost
you
of
never
that,
have
too.
stability, and it costs a lot. And I think this helps with that. I mean, people will leave, and you can't. I don't think you can control that 100%. I don't think that the workforce we have now is the same as it was for like my parents' generation, where
Absolutely
people
not.
had a job and they were there for 40 years and they retired. I think now people
Now
are
that
interested.
hurts you on a resume.
I think people are interested in mobility.
Yes.
They want a job where they can, if they find another job that's going to pay a little bit more, or they want to move to a different state or move to a different area, they do it.
Right.
They're not as worried about, being at the same place for 30, 40 years.
Right.
Which is a very different outlook
Of course it is.
on how to, approach your employment.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. So that's a challenge as it is. And then post-COVID, there's just less people, working. I think a lot of people were home during COVID. They realized the value of spending more time with their families. Some of them sold their homes. They downsized. They've got some money. They don't need to work like they did. There's a lot of reasons that this happened. But all I can say is that the workforce is really shrunk.
Yeah. And I think everyone was introduced to a new work-life paradigm,
Right,
with
right.
that balance.
Yeah.
And, it's something that as employers we have to pivot to.
Right.
But getting back to how effective the brainstorming session was with you, I think that's what we do really well as a company, as well as employ those methodologies to help with a specific problem. So if you know that you have a specific problem that you're dealing with and struggling with a little bit, that's part of our a la carte menu. We'll come in, we'll facilitate those discussions, we'll help to execute those initiatives, improvement initiatives, and we'll show you the gains that you've made. So I think that's important as well. There's so much more that I want to talk about. I don't want you to leave for the rest of the night.
I know. I'm looking at the time here. We've got a little more time, but I mean, this is the type of thing you could talk hours and hours on, quite honestly. I mean, I'm looking at the kind of the
I know
what
we
we
kind of
wrote
have like a
down
little
here.
guide sheet.
I mean, this is about a
and-
6-hour conversation if we go through all this stuff.
It's probably, like I said, it's probably like a series of things, because there is so much under every subject that we kind of alluded to earlier, you know.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, like, the key thing to understand is that, you know, if you have someone come in to evaluate either your practice or your business, as a consultant, what we do, it's a very organized, structured way of doing it. It's not just going in and saying, hey, what are the problems here? We have a very structured way of approaching things. We're looking very much at the culture, the processes in the office. And then the bottom line is, what we're trying to do is improve the patient and the customer service, which we do. We're trying to improve revenue generation, which we can always do if we improve processes. There's always processes that can be improved. You know, try to improve the culture and try to make it so that the staff feel more valued, so there's more stability. These are some of the things we're doing. Sometimes we teach leadership skills to you know, people who will be there leading the group or the practice or the business after we're gone. See, these are all other things that sometimes have to be done.
And I think what's important with us too is, so many times when a consultant comes in, you know, like, oh my God, my job's going to get axed, you know, like that's a very common thought that people have. And it's a very specific approach that we take as we sit with your employees. So we kind of alleviate some of those fears. And sometimes jobs will be resourced into something different. But when we sit and talk with the employees, you know, we look at, gosh, tell me what your responsibilities are. You know, is there room for career growth that maybe this can morph into something else? So the approach, I feel, is very different, how we do things, than maybe other consultants that I've, as I was an employee in certain organizations, gosh, when you saw a consultant came in, you kind of ducked to avoid the axe, you know.
But, you know, improving the bottom line doesn't mean just cutting
not just
staff.
cutting resources. It's really finding better ways to do things.
Right, it's finding better ways.
Reallocating those resources.
I mean, we try not to make a recommendation to bring in more staff, but sometimes that could be a recommendation.
Whatever your workflow calls for.
Right.
I mean, it's an honest, unbiased evaluation of your processes. So sometimes that will call for not touching resources. Sometimes that will call for, you know, an addition of this resource would be extremely helpful. Or sometimes it will call for, you know, you maybe have X over the amount that you can realistically carry, and you can either choose to grow in this area and morph this into something else, or you know, at times they will be. We will be streamlining.
Do you want to talk about some of the other projects? Because there are some other interesting things that, you know, we've done over the years. Some real quick ones, if you could. How you've shown, you've done some simple things that have improved, you know, either the bottom line or the patient experience or the customer experience.
Yeah, I think something that's, I want to stick with the simple things today, because I think when you start opening up that discussion, it's going to be at least like a 30-minute discussion.
Sure.
Because I get passionate about it, and I want to share some techniques and tips and how we do things. But just to answer your question in a very streamlined way, I think one of the things that people can do in their workplace that doesn't happen a lot is what's called a waste walk. Like really walking through your department as if you've never seen it before, and saying why, questioning everything. Why are we doing this? Why are we making 5 copies of this? Why are we still using paper? You know, why is this happening at this step of the way? And I think, just for a little tip, find out who your customer is of each step. You know, if I'll give you a quick example of something that we had done in a hospital situation. Is when a person went into the emergency room, they were generating 75 stickers on every patient when they got admitted. Now, looking at that, that went down to 15 stickers. And just that cost saving, when you think of how many patients get seen in an ER every day times 30 days a month to print out those stickers.
Right.
I mean, that was thousands and thousands of dollars.
Sure.
That was saved at the end of the year, and that's
And no
just
one thinks
something-
about it,
No one thinks about it. It's
Right.
just we've always done this, But think about who your customers are. So when you do this step, why are you doing that step? How is it being processed? Who's the next person? Like, who are you giving the handoff to? And do they need everything that you're doing, or do they throw it away, or do they not even look at it? Really find out what the ask is from that next person in that process.
There was another office that we were in that I thought was interesting. We looked at how many steps there was to get someone to a particular procedure, and it was an incredible amount of
22 steps.
And then, after some discussion and brainstorming and thought, that was brought down to, I don't know what the number was. Do you remember?
8.
8 from 22.
Yeah.
So it's just, and by streamlining the process, not only did it become more efficient and really save a lot of effort and potentially money for the practice, but patients were more satisfied because they got their procedures done in a more timely manner.
Well, and you
there was a
went to
lot
the
that was
office.
done.
Like, you went in the office, and then you would, how you find out, oh, now I have to have this procedure done, and you'd go home and you wait for a call, and you
Right.
figure out, look at your calendar and everything else. Well, at the end of the day, the process changed in a way that you went in the office, found out you need this procedure, you left knowing what date you were going to get the procedure on, and having all the education
Right. All in one
a
step.
packet.
Instead
All in
of
one step.
coming back and having to do it
Yeah.
in a separate step. I mean, that was really a
So
remarkable
that's just a
process
quick win,
change.
.
Right. And these things aren't hard to do. It's just it's not hard to always implement them, but you do have to go through a certain structured process to figure out the best solution.
Yep.
And once you do it, it makes huge positive
Oh, it
differences
is.
in the,
And
in the,
like
in
I
the business.
said, I can't stress enough staff engagement today. So when staff sees that, when they see that things are getting better, that someone's listening, I think one of the most important things that happens when I go into an organization or a department is people love to give their insights and feel like someone's listening to them, like their opinion is valued. And then when you take those insights and make a change based upon those insights, and it works, talk about staff retention.
Yeah. And then if you don't listen and, keep them engaged, they kind of drift away, over time. They'll lose interest. They'll maybe not be as functional as an employee as they had been in the past.
Yeah.
And maybe eventually they maybe just leave too. So,
And there's a way, that's part of the teaching that we do too. Not everything we can act upon or would make sense to act upon, but you can still take what that person says and have that conversation in a way. You had mentioned that we should do this. We're going to tweak that a little bit, and we're going to develop a new strategy based upon what you said. So
Yep.
the person knows, oh, they didn't take exactly what I said, but it was still important, and I still was part of that process. But that's a whole other communication strategy that we implement as well, and I think those are important because it's really closing the loop.
yeah, and I think the other thing to realize, it's not just like, one and done. You come in, make changes, and it's
Right.
done. I mean, you have to, this has to be from leadership down, from the management down. There has to be this continual effort to engage staff. So a lot of what we're talking about is almost culture change. Well, it isn't almost, it is culture change.
For sure.
And that's really crucial too, because it has to be an ongoing effort. If you just do it once and then you go back to the kind of the old ways of doing things, whatever they may have been, that doesn't work either.
No, then it becomes like soup du jour, and the changes that we implement stick, and I think that's what's so great about us and what we do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a good note to end on.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, once again, if you're interested in anything that we have to offer, feel free to contact us. We really get excited about this and doing things that can make businesses do better. So if you believe that patient experience and customer services is important, or valuing your employees is important, developing a great organizational culture, having great leadership skills, and having better revenue, then give us a call. If those things aren't important to you, well, I guess we're not the people for you. But
Maybe we won't do the rest of the podcast that we had planned.
You're probably already hung
But-
up. If you're probably not listening anymore if that wasn't important. But
No, but I was going to say, we probably should do a couple more, like a leadership podcast,
Yeah,
like a little series.
I think
or
that would
something,
be
because
great.
I think just starting and opening up and talking about
Yeah.
this stuff, there's so many important things like to share that can be done. Like as you listen to us, you can go in and do it the next day, and it would make such a huge difference.
I think so too. So we may be down the road, but I think that for today we've covered a lot of ground. I want to once again recognize Bay Coast Bank for helping us out and making these podcasts a reality. Bay Coast Bank is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoastbank.com or call 508-678-7641. If a business out there wants to get in touch with us,
Yeah, so just give us a call, 774-319-4230. Again, that's 774-319-4230.
and we'll post this too.
Yes.
And you can always check out our website because it really does delve into what we do.
Sure,
So
for sure.
if you haven't looked at the 27 Degrees website, there's a lot of valuable information there. And you can also go back and look at some of the podcasts that we've done too.
Yeah. Our website's 27degreesconsulting.com, by the way.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for sticking with us through the 27 Degree with Chris and Nancy from 27 Degrees Consulting. And we'll see you back in a couple of weeks.
Bye now.